Hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in. Sorry for the long absence. This is a Druids Rune Ramble, and it's taking place between our 5th and 6th episode. This Druids Rune Ramble was inspired by an experience I had in a restaurant. I had just sat down for some dinner, and I sat down next to a table full of about 5 men. The men had some notebooks open before them and a Bible. And I, living where I am, realized what this was. This was some Christian men's prayer group or support group meeting in a restaurant to discuss what was going on with their lives and try to make each other better. And nothing wrong with that. More mutual aid in the societies and friends talking is what the world needs. That's how we deal with our problems. That's how we refine our imperfections and become better. But as I was listening to them, it struck me the differences between particularly evangelical or fundamentalist Christianity and Druidry. And so I wanted to ramble about that for a little bit. And so this ramble is entitled, Why Druids Are Not Christians. It gets started because as I sat down, one of the men was talking about how he was supposed to be the spiritual head of his household and that his family was supposed to do, spiritually speaking, what he said. And it led me to a very vital difference between Christianity's worldview. And again, this is particularly true of evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity. Of Orthodoxy and Catholicism, this may not be as true. And Druidry. And that Christianity is a system based off a top-down model, whereas Druidry is a cooperative model. In Christianity, the head of what is right, what is wrong, what is ethical, is, in theory, God. And you get that instruction from a variety of sources, depending on which type of Christianity we're talking about. Some see it as the hierarchy of the church. Some see it as the infallibility of the scriptures. But on a personal daily basis, there is an inescapable fact that all forms of Christianity have a gender inequality in them. Now, in some it's more pronounced than others. But this gentleman saying that he was the spiritual head of his household and his family should live their lives according to his wishes was the first thing that struck my ear as being, hey, I got a disagreement with that. No one is saying that, and I don't think you'd find any Druid that would say that a parent does not have a right to raise a child the way they see fit. But I think where Druids and Christians would disagree is that amongst Christians, there is the expectation that that method of raising the child does not allow any form of argument when the child turns into adult. You are raising the child to turn into a carbon copy of you. There's a verse in the Bible about teach a child the ways of righteousness in his youth and his old age, he will not depart from it. There's an expectation that your children will never disobey you, that so long as you live, you are always in control. And this is particularly true if you are the man. Christianity gets this from certain first century and pre-first century traditions in the Levantine about how men and women are supposed to interact. But they've never really successfully gotten away from it. And it strikes me as being very different in that Christianity, no matter what form of it you practice, you are obeying somebody else's orders. Whereas in Druidry, you have a different dynamic. In Druidry, if you disagree with the Druids of your grove, they find that healthy. They find that actually admirable because it shows you are a thinking, reasoning person. Now, they're going to expect you to have reasons behind why you disagree and be able to defend them. And they're going to expect you to try to persuade them to take your point of view and allow them to do the same. But they're never going to order you. In fact, I can't think off the top of my head of any reputable Druid order who has an archdruid that has sent out something like a fatwa and Druids taken it seriously and not just like laughed at him and raised another pint. It's not that way. Druidry, in my experience from what I have seen and what I have read, is a much more cooperative endeavor. There's an expectation that everybody involved in the group is equally responsible for themselves and for each other. If you see one of your grove members who's having a problem and you don't help them, that is your problem now. You should at least, go over and offer them some advice. You should at least go over and try to take care of them. Likewise, if you see one of your grove members involved in something that's spiritually dangerous, you are obligated to at least warn them about it. But at no point are you going to issue an order or get in their way, because that kind of free will, that's saying, that's how I want to say it. That's almost sacrosanct in Druidry. Whereas in Christianity, really, if you stop and think about the top-down model of it, they don't really want you to have free will. In fact, free will is kind of the problem in Christianity. the way it's set up, the fact that you can choose to do what God or the authorities don't want you to do is sinful and is a problem. Whereas in Druidry, if you don't do something virtually practice-wise like the rest of the group doesn't necessarily say, oh, you're bad. They just simply say, well, maybe that's not what we want to do. I'm not phrasing this idea well as I see it. I guess what I'm saying is that in Christianity, I see the system as there's always something telling you how to live your life down to the daily practices, not just belief, but down to the daily practices. And they have a spiritual authority to demand of you or exact spiritual punishment. Whereas in Druidry, we may try to persuade you to adopt a spiritual practice or moral point of view, but at no point is any Druid believed to have the authority to quote-unquote punish you. All the karma and spiritual stuff that's going to happen from a decision you make in Druidry is believed to come from the fact that you did it. There's no one over you. It's you and the universe. The universe will respond accordingly. Kind of a long-winded point there, but going on to the second point I noticed as I got to thinking about it. Christianity has a God that is separate from physical reality, whereas in Druidry, we see that physical reality isn't possible without a God, and that God is partly a medium as well as a being. Druidry therefore believes that God is not separate from any human endeavor or action. Whenever I hear Christians talk about, this is particularly again true of evangelical and fundamentalist Christians, their concept of sin, that there are things you can do that separate you from God, Druidry would say there is no way to ever be separated from the divine presence. That's just not possible. Everything that exists because the divine presence maintains it, because the divine creators are spontaneously, every moment, recreating and sustaining our existence. They are in everything and everyone. To say that something can separate you from divinity is just not possible. You often hear a phrase, God in heaven, in Christianity, and it's this deeply rooted emotional belief that God is so above humanity that there is a separation, at least spiritually speaking, between God and humanity, and the two cannot talk except for God making some kind of divine miracle, some kind of prophet gets a message, somebody records what God said. It's all in the past, not in the present. Whereas in Druidry, the divine is believed to be speaking to you at every single moment if you just listen. And I'm fully aware there are some Christians that will say, well, wait a minute, the Holy Spirit can come and talk to you. Yeah, it's interesting every time I meet those Christians. If I ask them what did the Holy Spirit lead you to say or lead you to do, I can always find some other Christian that will argue, well, that's not what the Holy Spirit would encourage you to do. You made that up. There is an ingrained belief, in my opinion, even if Christians don't want to believe it, that God is done talking, and that essentially, to know what God said, you need to return to dead sources or authority. You can't really ever know it yourself. And although there are Christian movements that will encourage you to have what they call the personal relationship or the speaking in the Spirit, everyone distrusts that person because at some point that person is going to say something that's true for them and not true for somebody else. Actually, let me use a different word other than truth. They're going to say something that resonates for them but does not resonate for somebody else. And that discordance is going to cause people to doubt or attack or suddenly feel inferior or maybe even jealous. And that's where that goes. A long time ago in a Druids Are Not podcast, I said that in my belief, whenever the divine talks to you, it is telling you something specifically for you. It might inspire you to bring up something to talk to other people about, but then when it comes to the world of humanity, we talk together about what we're going to do. I don't think that there's any deity ever that has ever come down to someone and said, yay, go make everybody do this. I just don't think that's possible. The third difference I've seen. Christianity believes that humans are powerless. Druidry believes that they are actually powerful. I'm talking about spiritually, which leads to our next idea, which will come up in point 4. In Christianity, humans are believed to be completely, totally powerless to have any positive change in their life. Again, particularly true of evangelical and fundamentalists, who will say things like, by the power of Christ through me, I can do this. They completely turn themselves into this powerless, ineffectual victim of life. Whereas in Druidry, we hold that anything that happens to you is at least partly your manifestation. Yes, it's possible to have other people come by and subject you to their will. It's called force. But if you stay there and continue to let them and don't resist, then you're partly responsible for it. We believe in druidry, and I've seen in most pagan systems, that your personal work, your personal spiritual power, is your responsibility. It's not something somebody else can do for you. A prime example of this is in the Christian example of Jesus dying for your sins. It's ironic that in Judaism, sin really isn't that big a deal. If you look at the Jewish scriptures and Jewish practice, how did you buy off sin? You brought an animal to a temple and you slaughtered the animal in a ritualistic manner or had someone do it for you. To put that into a modern parlance, that's like, oh man, I had an affair with my wife. Here, break this microwave. Puts it kind of in a different perspective, doesn't it? There is the whole thing of, well, something's alive being made dead, and we'll go into that about how that's a almost universal human thing in the ancient world later. But it doesn't change the fact that for the most part, these people are coming and they're giving away a possession to make right a spiritual fault. And even if they don't have the possession, they can actually buy one and have it ritually slaughtered instead. So to say that sin is this big, ultimate thing in Judaism, it was never really there. And yet, when Christianity comes about, they take it and they turn it into something completely different than what their parent religion did. And I have to believe it was used as a tool to control people's minds, a tool to control how they feel and how they behave. Which brings me to my fourth point. Christianity states that only what one believes is ultimately the judge of their character. Druidry believes that it is what people do and their actions and deeds that are the judge of their character. Christianity states that since you are powerless, since you are a mere human, only the divine can give you meaning. And only if you believe in the divine our way are you good enough to go to heaven. Are you having any worth as a person? You must believe the way we do. Again, it goes back to top-down control. Trying to get two druids to agree completely on something is like trying to get a bunch of cats to agree which way they want to go. It just doesn't work. And that's actually healthy, which is why I think druidry now will always be with us in some form. Its core principles are, well, I'll go into the core principle thing a little bit later. But it's remarkable to me that druidry supposedly has died off 3 times, when really it's just kind of like it went to sleep for a little bit and then woke back up. And I see the ideas in druidry constantly coming back, constantly speaking to humanity in ways that organized religion just doesn't really seem to do. And I think it really gets back to this point. I mean, you can sit there in a church service and listen passively to someone giving a sermon about how you're supposed to behave, then go out and live your life, again, passively with this authority over you telling you everything you're supposed to do. You never really grow up in Christianity. You never really have your individual responsibility. Now, I'm aware people, particularly Christians, will say, but wait a minute, it's, you're judged by your actions when you die. No, not really. Every single Christian denomination says that the first and primary thing in their version of the afterlife is, did you believe the way we believed? And if the answer is yes, bang, everything else is secondary. They will, for a good example is the typical mafioso thing in bad movies. The mafioso goes off, commits a murder, commits a crime, commits a theft, goes to confession, confesses, and because he's a good believing Catholic boy and he's confessed, he's okay to go to heaven. And then usually in the movie he gets shot. The point is that it shows that kind of disparity, that it goes back to the whole idea of the Christian system is all about belief, not action. Whereas in druidry, it's all about actions, because we hold that you cannot make an action if you didn't believe it was the right action to do. That action is more revealing of your character. Fifth one, Christianity believes that the belief in its... There we are. Christianity believes that its belief in its dogma is the only way to a paradisial afterlife. Druidry believes it is a person's deeds and actions that determines what happens in their afterlife. Now, in Christianity, again, as I said, the primary concern is actually one centered on your eternal fate. And if you don't believe the way the Christian denomination says you're supposed to, by their dogma, you're going to hell. For the longest time, Catholics believed all Protestants were going to hell because technically they were heretics, and vice versa. I remember my own parents at one point telling me that when a Catholic died, essentially he was bound for hell and that it was a sad, horrible thing. It amazes me the divisiveness I see in Christianity. And again, it goes back to the whole idea of someone has to be the authority. You have to agree with them. If you don't agree with them, you're wrong. And being wrong in Christianity, or most other monotheistic systems, is an inherent way to eternal damnation. Whereas in Druidry, if I disagree about the nature of the divine with another Druid, if I even disagree with the nature of the divine with my Archdruid, nobody cares. And no one's going to say it makes you a bad Druid on what you believe. The only thing to say what makes you a quote-unquote good or bad Druid is in what you do. For instance, in Druidry, there is a always going back and forth disagreement about whether or not Druidry is a polytheistic or a monotheistic system or some combination of the two. The Archdruid of my particular order is a polytheist, but when he wrote his book about what he felt Druidry was, he says, but we have Christian members. Now, how Christians make that work with their former dogma, I'm not quite sure. But I have seen some people on YouTube that are what they call themselves Christian Druids, because they believe that ultimately, and they get this from sources like James Bonnewick, that Druidry is a monotheistic system. It just happens to be a monotheistic system that didn't have Hebrew titles. And they make it work that way somehow in their set of beliefs. I myself lean towards the monotheistic side of things. I believe that ultimately there is one kind of God/reality. But at the same time, I believe there are some intermediary spirits and beings in there that throughout history we've either called angels, fairies, gods, spirits, totems, you name it. And so I tend to use the term the holy ones to include not only the source of everything, but all those things that serve it on the other side. The point is, if I show up at a Grove meeting, no one's going to pull out a dogma sheet and say, yea, do you believe that Gadga is the true way and the light? Oh, nope, sorry, you said more again. You're out of here, heretic! It doesn't happen that way. All right, sixth. Christianity has an eternal place of punishment for those that fail to believe in its demands. Druidry believes that punishment and purification are limited in time and that eventually all living beings will reach an enlightened afterlife. So in Christianity, if you disagree with the system, they have to have some way to punish you. And ultimately, I think that all Christian, and this is somewhat true of Judaism, but not as much, because in Jewish belief they have the 7 Noahic laws, and you can get people that aren't Jews into Olam. My Hebrews fail me. Olam Haba? I think so. I think that's how you say it. Olam Haba, the world to come. You get them into the world to come if they obey these 7 rules. And in Islam, they have it's the Christian afterlife in Apocalypse pales in comparison to what you read about in the Quran. I mean, it's very clearly and if you're not Muslim when the end of the world comes, everybody dies. It's a trait of monotheistic orthodox systems that if you're going to say you have the one true way, you have to do something with people who disagree with you. And gosh, claiming you have an eternal pit of fiery torture to throw them into if they disagree is really convenient for your missionaries to scare people into listening to you. Well, in Druidry, and this is an idea that primarily from what I can trace comes from Ross Nichols, there is no eternal damnation. There are Druid systems that say, yes, there's something like the Christian hell, but it's a place where souls are refined more than they are punished. And then they're given another shot through reincarnation to try to get it right. It is a common Druid belief and most Druid orders that eventually every living being will enlighten. Now, I will confess I had some problems with this when I first heard this, and I still have some knee-jerk emotional problems with it. I have some problems believing that nightmare people like Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, we can go down the list of all the horrible villains humanity has produced. I have some problems believing they will ever know a blissful afterlife. I really, still to this day, believe it is possible to damage your spirit and your soul so badly, it cannot come back from that. And so in my own afterlife construction, I believe there is a place where souls are just, you're too damaged and they're obliviated. There's no coming back from that. There is a danger of going across the pale. But at the same time, I don't think that it's like some God that says, you're going there because you didn't believe in me. You're going there because you disagree with me. It is something that happens to the soul itself. It is something I guess now as I talk about it, and this may just be me, it's maybe all of Druidry, but I think most Druids would pause and reflect on this and say they could see some logic to it. That if you truly have free will and you truly are a spiritual, powerful being, and you do things that are bad for you, it is possible to break the system. If I put things into a car's engine that are going to destroy the engine, there comes a point where the engine is not savable anymore. Or the repair work to repair the engine is just not going to happen. There comes a point where you can break that system. I think that's spiritually true of a human soul. There is a place where you can commit enough evil, there is just no coming back from it. But I also think that's extraordinarily rare. I think that we could probably, in the span of human history, write the entirety of people that have done that to themselves in one volume. And I'm including all of human history back to the prehistoric era. I don't think it's that. It's not the end-all, be-all like it is in Christianity. Whereas in Christianity, if you even mildly disagree with the doctrine, you're going to hell. There is no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, modern Christian denominations just don't talk about this a lot. But if you look at their history, this was one of the things that whenever a schism happened, the side they broke off from would immediately accuse the splinter denomination of you're leading people to hell. The seventh difference between Christianity and Druidry I got to thinking about. Christianity works by guilt, often unearned. Druidry works by just merit or punishment for deeds done. In Christianity, sin is inherited from the moment you exist. You have done nothing to earn it. In Christianity, you had no choice about even coming to this reality. It was your two parents getting together and God sending you here. Which means in their system, from the get-go, God is setting you up to fail and burn unless you believe in Him a certain way. The guilt of wrongdoing is automatic. They have a hatred of themselves and the natural condition they find themselves in. They have an emotional and, in my opinion, moral disunity with being human. In their system, being human is being wrong. Druidry is the exact opposite. Druidry states that you can only judge a human being's character and their worth based on what they have done, and anything they have done cannot be taken away from them. They will carry that spiritual benefit or fault with them because of what they have or haven't done, which is why you should be careful about what you do or don't do. Christianity just doesn't see it that way. And again, I have to think it's because they want to be able to control you and make you in fear. Eighth point, Christianity is centered on death. Living behavior is secondary to its worldview. Druidry is centered on living and the actions and practices that promote it. Christianity, being obsessed with an afterlife realm and using it to scare people into believing, is primarily a system that centers on where you're going to go when you die. And that is particularly true of evangelical and fundamentalist Christianity in the United States. Almost every time I hear one of these guys preach, they are preaching not on a daily concern. They are preaching on your eternal soul, your eternal station, do this or else. The Christian term for it is turn or burn messages. And that's all I hear. And even if I hear a sermon that isn't supposed to be about that, the turn or burn creeps back in. It is central to the way the religion is patterned. You don't find Druids trying to save your soul. Druids come along and say, look, we have these seasonal celebrations we do. We have these rites of homage we do. We have offerings we give to the spirits, and there are some personal rights between you and the spirit that you can work out your imperfections on. But at no point do Druids assume, and again, it's because of our belief that eventually you're all going to get there, that they need to save your soul. They believe that you're going to do that on your own. They believe you're going to refine yourself and make yourself whatever it is you're supposed to be on your own. And there is also in Christianity this kind of judgmental thing going on how good of a Christian can you be based off this, because it ties into where you're going to end up in the afterlife. That just isn't there in Druidry. If you have a Druid member that shows up to the Grove in his SUV guzzling gas and just can't pin down his high-tech devices and is a glamper rather than a camper, other Druids might put some social pressure on him to rethink his choices, but no one's going to go, you bad Druid, don't you show up. That's just not going to happen. Number 9, Christianity has an ultimately violence-based system. Light and dark are at war. There's a cataclysmic end-times battle. Druidry has an ultimately harmonious system, seeking to give every emotion and drive its proper place. It has no ending battle, and its religious myth of violence is in its ancient antiquity. Christianity is set up off the idea of you have God and you have the devil. The devil is always trying to keep you from doing what God wants you to do. You need to listen to God or you're going to be eternally damned. And its mythology, the religious violence of antiquity, which most myths have in the ancient era, is currently going on in the present. It has a worldview that has light and dark constantly at war. Sin and holiness are always battling for your mind. Whereas in Druidry, the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomori have already had their battle. It was so far in the past that it's mythopoetic, and it's not going on today other than we're going to draw some analogies for it to the psychological processes going on in your mind. In particularly fundamentalist Christianity, there is a belief that there are demons out there trying to corrupt you and pervert you. You're not going to find many Druids that are convinced the Fomori are out in the march. We joke about mischievous sprites and fae occasionally mucking around with rituals or hiding our car keys, but you're not going to find many Druids that believe that there are entities out there seeking to possess you and drive you away. We're not saying that those things can't occur spiritually and that there aren't spirits that might not interact with the world, but we're saying that it's not the normal state of affairs. Whereas in Christianity, that is believed to be the normal state of affairs. If you look at the theology and look at how it's behaved and believed in, that is constantly going on. And the whole idea of believing in God and your doctrine and your dogma is to protect you from that. It is a war cell. It is a, hey, be aware, the devil is a hungry lion seeking whom he may devour. Demons are waiting to jump into you at an unguarded moment and give you bad habits or turn you to evil or take control of your sexual habits, yada, yada, yada. That's just not there in Druidry. In fact, there are probably Druids who don't even believe that such a spiritual thing could occur because, one, they've never seen it, and two, if it's ever been recorded, they will come up with another explanation like, well, maybe the person's schizophrenic, maybe there's a psychological issue here. It's just not a common thing in Druidry. The Christian self-hatred turns any drive or emotion they don't feel is holy enough for a church service into a sin, into something they should be ashamed of. Whereas in Druidry, if you have a moment of lust, we accept you're a human being. You've evolved lust for a reason. Think about it. What is a marriage without some lust? It's a really good friendship. Now, we're not saying that the friendship and the love and the admiration shouldn't be there too. But we're saying there should be some lust there too, so that the two of you, are getting busy, making babies, and being man and wife. In Christianity, there's a knee-jerk hatred for anger. Whereas in Druidry, we accept that if you feel angry about something, that is your mind telling you, hey, something is not right, fix it. Now, what you do with the anger is an entirely different situation. But in Druidry, the things that Christians normally call bad emotions aren't viewed as being bad. They're viewed as just being there. They're parts of a machine. And in order to make the machine work correctly, you need to have everything in its proper place. In order to be a fully functioning and whole human being in Druidry, you need to have all your emotional drives and all your psychological processes and all your spiritual being honed, refined, and purified and working in a complete, harmonious whole. Whereas in Christianity, they want it gone. I think the exact line from the Bible is, if your right hand offends you, cut it off. They want things like anger, lust, sorrow, depression, grief, envy. They want all these things gone, not realizing that they are messages from the human soul to its mind that something isn't right and needs to be fixed. Moving on. Number 10. Christianity believes that its holy text is the primary guide to belief and behavior. Druids don't have, as yet, a single volume of Holy Writ. Instead, we look to the outcomes of action as a guide to belief, and are currently in the process of recording our belief systems down and debating about what they should be and how they should work. This being said, I must remark that it is remarkable about how common the core beliefs are amongst the various Druid organizations. If you ask any Druid from any organization what it means to be a Druid, you're going to get a very similar answer on the core of Druidry. The differences are going to creep up in ritual practice, what liturgy is used, and to a degree how people view the ethics of Druidry. But in general, you're going to get the same core principles spoken about. And it's very unique, and I feel it speaks to the strength of the system that its trunk and its roots give it enough room to have different branches and everybody be able to do their thing and still be considered part of the Druid tree. That's not true of Christianity. In Christianity, if you disagree with the Bible on something, you can get in a lot of trouble. For instance, Ross Nichols is one of the preeminent, I don't want to say fathers of Druidry, but he's one of the preeminent founders of the modern Druid revival. I have some problems with some of the things Ross wrote. I disagree with him. But at the same time, I don't take anything away from his accomplishments. I don't take anything away from the good that he's done. I don't take anything away from the organization that he helped found, OBOD. And although I have some disagreements with him that essentially revolve around politics, I don't think he was a quote-unquote bad Druid or leading people to hell. Think about Martin Luther nailing the 99 Theses to the door, and you've got the difference I'm talking about here. I may disagree with Philip Carbaum or John Michael Greer, but at the same point I don't vilify them. When Luther disagreed with the Catholic Church, it started a war. People died. You're not going to see modern Druids wanting anyone to suffer for a difference of belief. Whereas in Christianity's history, throughout all of its history, you see that. You can even see that into the polite way Christians disagree with people who aren't Christians today. There is a certain amount of xenophobia that goes into the Christian system that leaks out. I see Christian programs trying to warn people about the dangers of religions and cultures that aren't Christian. Good example is in my youth, there's a thing that went around about rock and roll being quote-unquote the devil's music. And when the fundamentalists that were behind that movement couldn't get that to sell, they tried to co-opt it and make what today is called Christian contemporary music, and try to use that medium to reach youth to keep them invested in the Christian system, not realizing that they had just let it go. Like most phases, people grow out of it. I see a lot of people that are my age listening to Metallica and listening to Twisted Sister that have never committed a crime, don't do drugs, and have raised perfectly healthy families. The Christian fear of that thing that doesn't have the biblical stamp on it is very indicative to monotheistic systems about the top-down control they want that isn't there in Druidry. And it comes down to the whole idea of we have these rules, we have this system, you must believe it or else. Again, in Druidry, just not there. Point 11. Christianity is, in its orthodox forms, believe it is the sole provider of religious truth. Druidry believes that truth is separate from any organization and speaks for itself, truth that is. As a result, Druids believe that anyone, anywhere, can find religious truth. In Christianity, even amongst progressive Christians, you will not find an acceptance of another religion's religious writ as having been inspired by God. They can't do that. Now, they will say that it's holy, they will say that it's good, they will say that it's ethical, but they can't say it's divinely inspired. They cannot say it's the words of God, they cannot say that it's got the church stamp of approval on it because it didn't come from their organization. To use a bad computer analogy, it's like trying to get your Samsung mobile device to charge with an Apple charger. It's just not going to work. There's coding in there that prevents that. Whereas in Druidry, we see that truth exists of its own. There's actually a very famous Druid quote of the truth against the world. If something is true, it's true no matter who says it or who discovered it, or where it came from. And so as a result, you'll see Druids that will quote Buddhist documents, Islamic documents, Native American documents, Christian documents. And the truth itself is believed to speak for itself. We don't care who said it. We don't care where it came from. We care, does it work? Is it true? Because of that, Druidry tends to believe that every religion on the planet has truth inside it, including Christianity. It's just a question of how that truth is fully or not fully realized by the person and what the effects of the outcome of the practices are. The gender inequality, particularly in Christianity, has limited it. Going on. Number 12. Christianity believes that authority is the answer to all the questions of theology. Druidry believes that experience and demonstration of that experience is the answer to all questions of theology. So if you have an argument with a Christian, the first thing he's going to do, particularly true of a fundamentalist, is pull out his Bible and quote chapter and verse at you. And he's going to argue about what those chapters and verses mean, because the Bible is his authority. In Orthodox forms of Christianity, they're going to turn to the saints, or to the college cardinals, or to the Pope, or to the patriarchs, and say, these are what these people said. And to a degree, you have that in Judaism too, with the Talmud and the sages, but not the way it is in Christianity, where it's white and black, day or night, believe it or go to hell. Well, in Druidry, as I said earlier, disagreement is common. If I were to put Ross Nichols, Philip Carr-Gomm, who was his student, John Michael Greer, and let me pick a famous pseudo-druid from antiquity, John Toland, all in the same room, and ask them a question, I'd get 7 different answers. And interestingly enough, each one of them would have something instructive to teach. And that's the way we see an issue. In Druidry, the effect is more important than the dogma. And so as a result, when I ask someone a question and I get differing answers, the next thing that usually happens is one of the answers is try to be implemented and we see what happens. Druids very firmly believe that experience and the results proven by that experience are answers to all theological questions, not what some wise sage said 350 years ago. Common thing I hear about it in Druid communities is, if I gave you a map of Atlanta that was 200 years old, could you find your way around modern Atlanta? And the truth is, you'd only find maybe the major streets. Everything else has changed. That's how we view it. Since life is changing and humans are changing, the answers that we have from moment to moment and from age to age are going to somewhat fluctuate and change. There will be some common core principles, but the actual implementation and religious truth of it is going to have variance. And that is how life happens. Someone, I can't remember where I got this from, I think it was an autobiography of a Native American. Nature wants things to be round, life wants... was Lame Deer's book, Lame Deer, Secret Visions. And in it he says, in nature things are round, not square and straight lines. Life doesn't move in straight lines. Well, if life doesn't move in straight lines, neither does theology. It's just... I'm phrasing this really badly. Christianity and Orthodox monotheistic systems like it construct a model of spiritual reality and then demand spirituality meet the model. Yeah, this is a better way to say it. They demand it meets the model, and anything that doesn't meet the model is thrown out. Whereas in Druidry, we do create a model, but that model is constantly being changed and updated by the new things we find out to be true about how it functions. It's much more like science than it is like the traditional Orthodox religions that we've encountered. 13. Christianity believes that there are no more prophets. There is no more people coming that are going to tell you anything spiritually new. Druidry is expecting new quote-unquote prophets. We are expecting new revelations. We are expecting new people to have new insights that we're then going to implement and create our traditions around. Excuse me as I move a little bit. Sorry about that. If life is always moving forward and always changing, then it stands to reason that our theology is always going to get new revelations that need to be discussed and either implemented or not, and from there turn into action or belief. And that's okay. In fact, I think that's why Druidry has supposedly died out 2 or 3 times and then come back. I think I actually already mentioned this earlier, but I got it written down here again somehow in my notes. Christianity believes that humans are spiritually powerless. Druidry believes they are spiritually powerful. In Christianity, when something happens and Christians ask for prayer about it, it is my opinion they don't really expect there to be any change just because of the number of people praying about it. They're just doing that as an emotional release, because ultimately they believe that God's going to have its will one way or the other, and even if you weren't to pray about it, if God wanted something to happen, it would. Whereas in Druidry, it's the opposite. In Druidry, when we ask for people to come together and commit their spiritual energy to making change, we are expecting a result. And if we don't get it, that can really give us some room for pause and get us ranting and raving at the holy ones and saying, hey, why did you give me what we asked for? The difference in the two systems is that Christianity believes that one is essentially a victim to life, and Druidry believes that although life may smack you on your ass, there's always something you can at least try to do about it. You can get out there and give an offering. You can get out there and create a rite. You can get out there and get a bunch of people to put a bunch of energy towards a result. You aren't a powerless victim in Druidry to life, whereas you are in Christianity. Now, all this being said, there are certain things that Christianity and Druidry do agree on, and this is because of the complex history of Western culture. It amazes me how many things that Christians believe are uniquely Christian never originated in Christianity. They actually originate from pagan cultures of antiquity that are close to them at the time. And that the adoption of these things by Christianity and Christianity's domination of Western culture has caused people to believe they are Christian. For instance, the whole idea of a hell, that was actually something that came from pagan religions around first century Judaism. Judaism does not have a hell, does not have an eternal place of punishment. The closest thing you have in Judaism to a place of punishment is this thing called Sheol. And Sheol, which means the pit, is viewed as just kind of this afterlife destination where people are waiting for Olam Haba, the world to come. It's not the devil with a pitchfork and red poke you over a fire thing that Christianity turned it into. Another good example is the concept of the divine having to come down and do something to save humanity. That the whole dying God myth thing has to happen. Judaism didn't have anything like that, but boy, the Egyptians have Osiris, the Romans have Mithras, the Canaanites have Baal. I mean, there's a lot of dying gods coming back to life in pagan cultures. So, there you go. Alright, the things... And I bring this up because I guess I don't believe in such a thing as a pure culture or a pure religion. Religion is a outgrowth of cultural experience. Cultures are constantly influencing one another, so therefore religions are constantly influencing one another. I mean, if you look at the early history of Islam, you can definitely see things that Muhammad lifted from Judaism and Christianity he thought were useful. That probably didn't, well, I can't say it didn't occur to him, but probably weren't uniquely Arab. So the complex nature there has caused Druidry and Christianity to have some things it agrees upon. And these are just 7 quick things I wrote down that I think that they both agree upon. First thing Christians and Druids agree on is that humans have to be virtuous. As I see Druidry, there are these things I call the 33 virtues, which I'm going to put into my elements of practice, which are 33 different things grouped into 3 groups of 11 that I think all Druids would say, yes, that's a Druid form of behavior. Christians have the same things. Christian and Druids both expect that people shouldn't lie, people shouldn't steal, people shouldn't harm one another. People should endeavor to refine their character and make themselves better. These are all things that we are seeing as being virtues. We expect people to be honest. We expect them to be polite. The second thing we agree on is that we expect humans must aid one another. No one likes a jerk. Third thing, humans should spend part of their time in religious observation and spiritual reflection. Fourth, humans possess an immortal soul. Fifth, humans must care for the material world. Going back to point 4 real quick, humans possess an immortal soul. That's actually documented all the way back from Roman writers encountering the Gallic Druids. So that was a pretty universal belief. Now, the form of the soul of antiquity is definitely different than how we think about it now, but it's there. There's an afterlife. There's an immortality of your being. Fifth, humans must care for the material world. Christians that are reading their Holy Writ carefully realize that the charge that's given to humanity in Genesis never went away. They will almost all talk about how man is given dominion over the earth and the animals. But in theory, the whole idea of God's first commandment to humanity of, hey, take care of the garden, take care of the planet, that never went away. That was never abrogated. And I actually meet people that are devout Christians involved in things like the Audubon Society or other conservation causes that talk about this. That, if you truly are being a reverent Christian, you must respect everything God created. It's kind of hard to show that reverence if you're destroying things with a strip mine just willy-nilly. Or, not replanting trees from the forest that you've collected for lumber. And they have a different take on ecological issues than Druids do, but they do recognize that, hey, humans are supposed to be caring for the planet, not destroying it. 6. Human society must be peaceful and just. Both Druids and Christians agree upon that. And then the 7th point I put down here is that humans should always be spending time developing their character. Let's see what's got here. Okay, so on my ending notes here, these things that I've said about Christianity and Druidry are also somewhat true of Islam and Druidry, but there are additional differences there that should be discussed in regards to Islam. It regards somewhat similarly to Judaism and Druidry, and there are indeed differences between the two. But Judaism actually shares more in common with how Druidry operates than Christianity and Islam do. And what I mean by that is, in Jewish circles, if there is a theological question about how to behave, it's not just, well, these books say this. The thing that normally happens is the books, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, all that stuff is consulted by a group of learned people. They're usually called rabbis or rebbes, depending on which form of Judaism we're talking about what that answer should be. But then there's a debate about it. And a lot of the Talmud is actually that debate. In most organized major Jewish branches of the faith, there is I don't think it's yearly, I think it's like every 5 years, there is a massive thing they have when they come together, and the rabbis all come together and talk about issues that have come up and how are we going to handle them. And usually it's issues that aren't in the book. And so there's an acknowledgement there that life is never going to be something you can all get from one unchangeable source. There has to be a living thing to it. That's why I say that in Judaism there's a lot more similarity to how they behave as how Druids behave on a daily basis, as far as the process by which we determine our religious truth. Definitely differences, what that religious truth is believed to be, but the process is very similar. Whereas in Islam or in Christianity, it's still pretty much top down. Okay, here's what else I have in the ramble. A good example of this mixing of stuff. Many Druid revival descendant organizations in their original days actually used Christian scriptures, saints, and locations and terms to describe their experience. You would have a good example is if you pick up the Druid Handbook by John Michael Greer, he has a chart that lists Christian saints in relation to the 8 holy days of Druidry and what saints he feels matches those days. You can read some things like Ross Nichols, where he was actually using Jewish Kabbalah and some aspects of ritual magic to describe what he felt were more Druid processes. Part of this has to do with the English and American culture's relationship to Christianity. For instance, I myself know of no Druid that doesn't celebrate Christmas. It's just kind of hard, first of all, to get away from Christmas, but second, I don't know any Druid that wants to be a jerk to their family, and so most of the Druids I know have members of their family that are Christians, so they will celebrate Christmas with their family, and the family just, kind of doesn't talk about their religious difference at the time, but they still go through all the outward motions of it. You go through the gift giving, the caroling, the hanging out with family, and in those processes, from what would appear to be a separate religion, when Druids are in them, they can feel the holy intent of the ceremony. A good example is when I hear people singing a particular Christmas carol, O Holy Night. You can feel the Awen moving in there. You can feel the inspiration and the hope that the holiday is trying to get across. It is my opinion that Druids, being the kind of people we are, and seeing the divine the way we do, we see the divine talking to everybody, everywhere, every how. And so because of who we are and we understand the Holy One's interaction with humanity, we feel the Awen move in a church service as well as in our sacred grove. And we hear its voice in both Amergan's song and Amazing Grace. I really wish that Christians could do the same for us. This has been a Druids Rune Ramble. I'm probably going to start numbering these because they're starting to come up more often. I have patterned my original Druids episodes off the 33 Virtues, and I was trying to keep that pattern. But as I run into difficulties recording on time and posting, the rambles come out just to keep me on task, sort of. So, I don't know. But again, this one's between our 5th and 6th episode. It is a ramble about the differences between Christianity and Druidry, and I hope you enjoyed it. It's coming in at just under an hour, so I hope that's not too much time. I apologize for any sound issues, but again, working on a limited budget and time. This has been Wise Thrice, and I hope that what I rambled about in this what I rambled about in this podcast gave you some thought or helped elucidate some things for you or helped dealing with people a little better. The first ramble I put out, if I remember correctly, was actually about how to survive Christmas. And now that I put this one up, it makes me think that maybe I need to do a ramble about how to relate to Christians. Simply because in the West, Christianity is the majority religion, and we being a minority, there's going to be stories there. Sometimes beneficial ones, and sometimes very bad ones. But maybe that will be the next ramble, I don't know. The rambles are very, very unorganized, as you can see. It's mostly just me talking to the mic because, hey, my blood is up and I gotta get something out. So, that's that. Thank you for listening again. This has been Druids Are Ramble. The date is September 9th already? Wow. Yeah, September 29th, 2014, Common Era. This is Wise Thrice, wishing you health, wealth, and peace until I see you again.